The diplomatic shuttle Serenity's edge hummed quietly as it approached the human colony ship New Horizon. I pressed my four-fingered hand against the cool viewport, watching the massive vessel grow larger with each passing moment. My scales shifted from their usual blue-green to a nervous purple, betraying my anxiety despite my attempts to maintain composure. As the appointed ambassador for the HFY Confederation, I had encountered dozens of species throughout the galaxy. From the crystalline Vorthak who communicated through harmonic frequencies, to the gaseous Nethrim who existed as living clouds of charged particles. Each first contact had been manageable, predictable even. We had protocols, established procedures that had worked for centuries. But humans were different. The reports from our scouts were contradictory and confusing. Some described them as primitive mammals who had barely achieved faster-than-light travel. Others spoke of their uncanny ability to adapt and survive in environments that would kill most sentient species. The military advisors warned of their seemingly irrational courage in combat, while our xenobiologists marveled at their impossible diversity and rapid technological advancement. Captain Zilthake, my longtime friend and the shuttle's pilot, glanced back at me with concern. His own scales had taken on a worried orange hue. "Ambassador Vexian, your stress patterns are showing. Perhaps we should postpone this meeting until you feel more prepared?" I forced my scales back to their neutral blue-green and straightened my formal robes. "No, Captain. The Confederation Council expects a full report within the solar cycle. We cannot delay first contact any longer." The truth was more complicated than I cared to admit. 3 months ago, our deep space monitoring stations had detected something that sent shockwaves through the highest levels of government. A human fleet, moving at impossible speeds through hyperspace, had engaged a Void Reaper hunting pack. These ancient machines had terrorized the galaxy for millennia, consuming entire civilizations without mercy or hesitation. No single species had ever successfully fought them off. The humans had not only fought them off. They had won. Decisively. The official reports were classified beyond my security clearance, but whispered rumors spoke of tactics so ruthless and effective that even our most experienced military commanders struggled to comprehend them. Some claimed the humans had turned the Reaper's own technology against them. Others suggested they had somehow predicted the machine's movements with impossible accuracy. "Incoming transmission from the human vessel," announced our communications officer, Lieutenant Cressel. Her usual confidence seemed shaken as she added, "They're requesting permission to send a shuttle to escort us to their docking bay." "Granted," I replied, though my throat felt dry. Standard protocol would have been for us to dock directly with their ship. The escort request suggested either extreme caution or a level of military precision that made me uncomfortable. Minutes later, a sleek human fighter appeared alongside our shuttle. It was smaller than our vessel but moved with a predatory grace that reminded me unpleasantly of the apex hunters on my homeworld. The pilot's voice crackled through our speakers, speaking in accented but perfectly grammatical galactic standard. "Welcome to the New Horizon, Ambassador Vexian. I'm Lieutenant Sarah Chin of the Terran Colonial Navy. Please maintain your current heading and speed while I guide you in." The voice was distinctly female, which our cultural briefings had told us to expect. What the briefings hadn't prepared me for was the underlying tone of absolute confidence. There was no deference to my rank or species, no diplomatic uncertainty. Just professional courtesy delivered with military precision. As we approached the massive colony ship, I began to understand why the humans had requested an escort. The New Horizon was not just a civilian vessel. Weapon ports lined its hull in configurations I didn't recognize, and sensor arrays swept space with an intensity that suggested constant vigilance. This was a ship prepared for war, even while carrying families and children to establish a new world. "Their defensive systems are remarkable," Captain Zilthake murmured, studying his tactical display. "I count at least 40 distinct weapon signatures, and their shield generators are producing energy readings I've never seen before." "Perhaps they're simply being cautious," I suggested, though my own unease was growing. "They're far from their homeworld, in unexplored space. Some level of preparation is understandable." The docking bay doors opened to reveal a cavernous space filled with activity. Human crew members moved with purposeful efficiency, directing our shuttle to a designated landing pad while others secured the area with weapons I couldn't immediately identify. Everything about their movements suggested military training, even among those wearing civilian clothing. As our shuttle settled onto the deck, I could see a small delegation waiting for us. 3 humans stood in formation, their posture relaxed but alert. The center figure was a tall woman with graying hair and insignia I assumed indicated high rank. To her left stood a younger man in what appeared to be civilian clothes but with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. On her right was another woman, smaller in stature but with eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of our arrival. "That must be Captain Maria Rodriguez," Lieutenant Cressal informed me, consulting her cultural database. "She's the military commander of this expedition." The civilian is Dr. James Patterson, their head of xenobiology. The other woman is Sarah Murphy, their diplomatic liaison. I stood slowly, checking my appearance one final time. My formal robes were perfectly arranged, my translation device was functioning correctly, and my ceremonial gifts were secured in their protective case. Everything was according to protocol. Yet as I watched the humans waiting for us, something deep in my primitive brain began sending warning signals. These were predators. Not in the crude sense of mindless aggression, but in the way they observed their environment, the way they positioned themselves for maximum tactical advantage even during a peaceful diplomatic meeting. Their very stillness spoke of coiled potential energy, ready to explode into action at a moment's notice. I had encountered warrior species before. The Draxan were renowned for their honor-bound military traditions. The Caltharian Empire had conquered a quarter of the galaxy through superior tactics and discipline. But there was something different about these humans, something that made my scales want to shift to warning colors despite my conscious efforts to remain calm. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward as our shuttle's ramp lowered. Her smile appeared genuine, but her eyes never stopped moving, constantly assessing potential threats even in this controlled environment. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. "Ambassador Vexian, welcome aboard the New Horizon. I'm Captain Maria Rodriguez. We're honored by your visit and look forward to establishing peaceful relations between our peoples." I descended the ramp with measured steps, my diplomatic training taking over despite my growing unease. "Captain Rodriguez, Dr. Patterson, Liaison Murphy. On behalf of the Kethvar Confederation, I bring greetings and hopes for mutual understanding between our civilizations." The formal exchange continued as protocol demanded, but I found myself studying the humans more closely than was perhaps polite. Their physical diversity was immediately apparent. Captain Rodriguez was tall and bronze-skinned with angular features, while Dr. Patterson was pale and stocky with soft edges. Sarah Murphy fell somewhere between them, with dark skin and hair tightly bound in what appeared to be both practical and aesthetic arrangement. Yet despite their obvious physical differences, they moved with a unity of purpose that spoke of shared training and common goals. Their body language was coordinated in ways that suggested extensive combat experience together. These were not just colleagues thrown together for a diplomatic mission. They were a team that had faced danger as one. Dr. Patterson stepped forward, his demeanor shifting to academic enthusiasm. "Ambassador, we've prepared detailed cultural presentations based on what little information we've been able to gather about your people. We're particularly interested in your mathematical systems and architectural principles." His genuine curiosity was refreshing after so much barely concealed military assessment, but even his scholarly interest carried an undertone that made me uncomfortable. Humans, it seemed, studied other species with the same intensity they brought to everything else. Not just casual interest, but deep, probing analysis that sought to understand every strength and weakness. "We would be pleased to share such information," I replied carefully. "Though I confess, we are equally curious about your own achievements. Your rapid technological development has been remarkable to observe from afar." Sarah Murphy smiled at this, and I noticed her expression contained something I couldn't quite identify. Not pride exactly, but a quiet confidence that spoke of hidden capabilities. "We've had some interesting challenges to overcome," she said diplomatically. "Perhaps during your stay,
we can discuss how different species approach problem solving.
As they led us deeper into the ship, I began to notice details that the initial briefings hadn't mentioned. The corridors were wider than necessary for human movement, suggesting they had been designed with alien guests in mind. The lighting could be adjusted across multiple spectrums, indicating consideration for species with different visual capabilities. Even the air composition was carefully controlled to accommodate various breathing requirements. This level of thoughtful preparation suggested intelligence-gathering capabilities that were far more sophisticated than we had realized.
The humans hadn't just built a colony ship.
They had built a platform for interspecies contact, designed from the ground up to accommodate aliens they had never met. "Your ship is remarkably well equipped for diplomatic purposes," I observed, trying to keep my tone neutral.
Captain Rodriguez glanced at me with what might have been amusement. "We like to be prepared for various contingencies. You never know what you might encounter in deep space." The casual way she delivered this statement sent another chill through my nervous system. Humans, it appeared, planned for everything,
including scenarios that other species would consider impossibly remote.
We entered a conference room that could have hosted delegations from a dozen different species simultaneously.
The furniture could be adjusted for various body types, the atmosphere could be modified for different breathing requirements, and translation equipment far more advanced than anything in our own diplomatic corps was discreetly integrated into the walls. "Please, make yourselves comfortable," Dr. Patterson said, gesturing to seating that had clearly been configured specifically for HFY physiology.
"We've prepared some refreshments that our research suggests should be compatible with your dietary requirements."
I settled into the provided chair, which fit my body perfectly despite the fact that humans and HFY had never shared detailed anatomical information. Their intelligence gathering was becoming more impressive and more unsettling with each passing minute. As the formal diplomatic presentations began, I found myself watching the humans more than listening to their words. Every gesture was controlled, every expression calculated for maximum effect. Yet beneath this careful diplomacy, I could sense something vast and dangerous, like standing next to a sleeping volcano that might erupt at any moment.
When Dr. Patterson began describing human history, I finally understood why my instincts were screaming warnings.
He spoke casually of global wars that had killed millions, of disasters that would have ended most civilizations, of challenges that humans had not just survived but used to become stronger. Each catastrophe had been met with adaptation, innovation, and a refusal to surrender that bordered on the incomprehensible. "Your species appears remarkably resilient," I managed to say, though my throat felt tight. Sarah Murphy's smile had sharp edges. "We've learned that the universe doesn't care about fairness or mercy. So we don't rely on either one." It was then, sitting in that perfectly appointed conference room surrounded by polite, professional humans, that I felt the first stirring of something I had never experienced in decades of diplomatic service. These weren't just another species seeking trade agreements or territorial negotiations. These were survivors of trials that would have destroyed my own people a dozen times over. And they were just getting started. The tour of the New Horizon began innocently enough. Captain Rodriguez led our small group through residential sections where human families went about their daily lives. Children played games that seemed to involve complex strategic thinking, while adults tended to hydroponic gardens that produced food with impossible efficiency. Everything appeared normal, peaceful even. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was seeing only the surface of something much deeper. The children's games, when I looked more closely, were teaching tactical awareness and resource management. The adults working in the gardens moved with the same purposeful efficiency I had noticed among the military personnel. Even in their domestic spaces, these humans maintained a level of readiness that suggested they expected trouble at any moment. "Your colony appears well organized," I commented to Dr. Patterson as we walked through a section dedicated to education and research. "We've learned the value of preparation," he replied with that same unsettling smile. "Every member of our community has multiple skill sets. Scientists who can fight, soldiers who can farm, children who understand the basics of survival in hostile environments." My translator was working perfectly, but I found myself questioning whether I was truly understanding what he meant. No civilized society trained their children for survival in hostile environments unless they expected to encounter such conditions regularly. The implication was deeply disturbing.
We entered a research laboratory where human scientists were analyzing samples from dozens of different worlds.
The equipment was more advanced than anything the Confederation had developed, and the scope of their research was staggering.
They weren't just studying individual planets or species. They were mapping the fundamental patterns of life throughout the galaxy.
"This is Dr. Emily Harrison," Captain Rodriguez introduced a woman hunched over a complex molecular analyzer. "She's our lead xenobiologist."
"Emily, could you show our guests some of your recent work?"
Dr. Harrison looked up with the intense focus of someone completely absorbed in her research. Her eyes were slightly bloodshot, suggesting she had been working for extended periods without adequate rest. When she spoke, her enthusiasm was infectious but tinged with an undertone of urgency. "We've been studying adaptive mechanisms across different species," she explained, pulling up holographic displays that showed genetic structures I didn't recognize.
"What we've discovered is fascinating.
Most species develop along fairly predictable evolutionary paths, with limited capacity for rapid adaptation."
She gestured to a series of charts showing biological development patterns.
The Draxen, for instance, achieved their current form approximately 50,000 years ago and have remained essentially unchanged since then. The Vorthak have been crystalline entities for over 100,000 years. Very stable, very specialized. I nodded politely, though I was beginning to suspect this presentation had a purpose beyond simple scientific exchange.
"And humans?"
Dr. Harrison's expression shifted to something between pride and concern.
"Humans are different.
Our species has undergone more significant biological and behavioral adaptation in the last 10,000 years than most species experience in a million. We're still changing, still adapting, still pushing the boundaries of what's possible."
She brought up a new display showing human population data from their homeworld.
The numbers were staggering. In just a few centuries, they had gone from a few million individuals to several billion, spread across every habitable environment on their planet and, then, beyond to other worlds. Most species achieve a stable population equilibrium based on their environmental resources, Dr. Harrison continued.
Humans just changed the environment to support larger populations. When we faced resource limitations, we developed new technologies.
When we encountered hostile conditions, we adapted ourselves to survive them. When we ran out of room on our homeworld, we built ships and found new worlds. The casual way she described reshaping entire worlds to suit human needs sent my scales shifting toward alarmed colors despite my efforts to control them.
This wasn't just adaptive behavior.
This was something approaching technological omnipotence driven by an inexorable drive to expand and survive. Captain Rodriguez noticed my reaction and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. The gesture was meant to be reassuring, but her fingers had the calloused strength of someone who had handled weapons extensively.
"I know it can be overwhelming when you first learn about human development patterns. We tend to approach problems differently than most species."
"How so?" I managed to ask, though my throat was becoming increasingly dry. "Most species we've studied develop technologies to work within their environmental limitations," Dr. Patterson explained.
Humans develop technologies to eliminate environmental limitations entirely.
It's a subtle but important difference in approach. Sarah Murphy stepped forward with a tablet displaying what appeared to be historical records.
"Perhaps some specific examples would be helpful."
"Ambassador, your species developed spaceflight to escape the limitations of a single world, correct?" "Yes," I replied carefully. "Our homeworld's resources were becoming strained, so we sought new planets with similar conditions to support our population." "That's a common pattern," she acknowledged. "Very logical, very sustainable."
Humans took a different approach.
When Earth's resources became strained, we developed technologies to create more resources. When that wasn't enough, we modified ourselves to live in environments that were previously uninhabitable. Desert regions, Arctic zones, even underwater cities. She swiped through images showing human settlements in conditions that would kill most species within minutes. Underwater colonies at crushing depths, cities built inside active volcanoes, research stations on worlds with toxic atmospheres and radiation levels that should have sterilized all life. Eventually, we did develop spaceflight, Sarah continued. But, not to find worlds like Earth. We went looking for worlds that would challenge us to become something more than we were. The implications of this statement hit me like a physical blow. Most species sought safety, stability, predictable conditions that would allow their civilization to flourish. Humans actively sought out danger and adversity as opportunities for growth. They weren't just survivors. They were predators of adversity itself, growing stronger with each challenge they encountered. That's a very aggressive approach to development, I said weakly. Dr. Harrison laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. You should see what we do when we're actually trying to be aggressive. Before I could ask what she meant, an alarm began sounding throughout the ship. Not the harsh shriek of immediate danger, but the steady, measured tone that indicated a planned exercise or demonstration. Captain Rodriguez immediately straightened, her casual demeanor shifting to complete military focus. "Ah, perfect timing," she said with satisfaction. "Ambassador, we're about to conduct a routine patrol exercise. Would you like to observe from the command deck?" The invitation was phrased politely, but something in her tone suggested that refusing would not be advisable. I nodded agreement, though my scales were now shifting through warning colors so rapidly that my diplomatic training was completely overwhelmed. The command deck of the New Horizon was unlike anything I had ever seen. Instead of the static control stations common to most starships, human crew members moved between multiple workstations with fluid efficiency. Holographic displays showed tactical information in real time, while banks of screens monitored everything from individual crew heart rates to minute fluctuations in the ship's fusion reactors. "Contact on long-range sensors," reported a young man whose calm voice contrasted sharply with the intense concentration on his face. "Single vessel, unknown configuration, approaching on Vector 77 Mark II. Captain Rodriguez moved to the central command position with the fluid grace of someone who had done this countless times before. "Classification? Analyzing now, Captain. Hull composition suggests Zarathi construction, but the drive signature doesn't match any known Zarathi designs." I felt my blood chill. The Zarathi were pirates, raiders who preyed on isolated colonies and trading vessels throughout the Outer Rim. They were cunning, ruthless, and equipped with stolen technology from a dozen different species. A single Zarathi raider could destroy most civilian vessels and escape before military forces could respond. "Recommendations?" Captain Rodriguez asked her crew. "Standard protocol would be to broadcast our defensive capabilities and request they alter course," responded the communications officer. "Non-standard options?" The weapons officer, a compact woman with scars on her hands that spoke of extensive combat experience, smiled grimly. "We could show them why approaching a human colony ship uninvited is a poor decision." Captain Rodriguez considered this for approximately 3 seconds. "Weapons Officer Chen, prepare a demonstration. Something educational but not permanently damaging." "Understood, Captain." Targeting their propulsion systems. I watched in fascination and growing horror as the human crew prepared for combat with the same casual efficiency they had shown while giving us a diplomatic tour. There was no panic, no last-minute preparations, no frantic communication with superiors. Every person knew exactly what to do, and they did it with practiced precision. "Zarathi vessel, this is Captain Rodriguez of the Terran colony ship New Horizon," the captain spoke into her communications array. "You are approaching our position on what appears to be an intercept course. Please alter your heading immediately." The response came back in the harsh, guttural language of the Zarathi, which my translator rendered as a string of profanities and demands for surrender. The pirate captain seemed to believe he was dealing with a standard civilian vessel carrying helpless refugees. Their response was predictably hostile, the communications officer reported with understatement that would have been amusing under different circumstances. "Fire when ready, Weapons Officer Chen." What happened next defied everything I thought I knew about space combat. Instead of the massive energy discharges typically associated with ship-to-ship warfare, the New Horizon fired what appeared to be a small projectile barely visible on the tactical display. The projectile covered the distance between the ships in seconds, moving at velocities that should have required enormous energy expenditure. When it struck the Zarathi vessel, instead of exploding, it seemed to dissolve into the hull like acid eating through metal. Within moments, the raider ship's engines went dark. Emergency systems failed one by one as whatever the humans had fired continued its work. The vessel began tumbling helplessly, completely disabled but, with life support systems mysteriously intact.
"What did you fire at them?"
I asked, my voice barely above a whisper.
Weapons Officer Chen turned to me with professional satisfaction. "Adaptive nanite swarm.
They're programmed to identify and neutralize specific ship systems while leaving life support and communication arrays functional."
"Very humane, really."
"They'll be able to call for rescue." The casual way she described technology that could selectively disable any starship in the galaxy sent waves of terror through my nervous system. This wasn't just advanced weapons technology. This was precision warfare that could neutralize any threat without destroying it, suggesting capabilities far beyond what any species in the Confederation possessed. "The nanites will degrade naturally in about 6 hours, Dr. Patterson added helpfully. "Assuming the Zarathi have learned their lesson by then, they should be able to restore basic propulsion and leave our territory."
Captain Rodriguez nodded approvingly at her crew's performance. "Excellent work, everyone. Back to standard patrol patterns." The entire engagement had lasted less than 5 minutes.
The humans had detected, identified, warned, and neutralized a threat that would have required hours of preparation and significant risk for any other species. They had done it with casual efficiency, as if disabling pirate vessels was just another routine maintenance task. "I trust this demonstration has been educational," Sarah Murphy said to me with a smile that was anything but reassuring.
"We find that most hostile entities respond well to practical examples of human capabilities."
I stared at her, my translation device struggling to process what I was feeling.
In my language, there was no word for the emotion that was coursing through my system.
It was beyond fear, beyond concern, beyond anything my species had evolved to experience. It was the recognition that I was standing next to creatures who had weaponized the fundamental forces of creation itself and treated annihilating pirates as a routine training exercise. For the first time in my diplomatic career, I understood what true fear felt like. The dinner invitation came as the day cycle was ending aboard the New Horizon. Captain Rodriguez had suggested that sharing a meal would provide a more relaxed environment for cultural exchange.
I accepted, though relaxation was the furthest thing from my current emotional state.
The casual demonstration of human military capabilities had left me deeply unsettled, and I suspected that was entirely intentional. The dining hall was another marvel of human engineering, capable of accommodating multiple species simultaneously while providing atmosphere and nutrition suitable for each. My meal had been prepared according to Kethvar dietary requirements and was surprisingly delicious. The humans ate food that appeared to consist of proteins and nutrients from various worlds, another subtle reminder of their adaptability. "Ambassador," Dr. Patterson said as he settled into his chair with a plate of what appeared to be synthesized meat and modified vegetables, "we're curious about your species' first contact protocols. How do you typically approach relationships with newly discovered civilizations?" The question seemed innocent enough, but I was beginning to understand that humans rarely asked innocent questions. Everything was data gathering, intelligence collection, strategic assessment disguised as casual conversation.
"We follow Confederation standard procedures," I replied carefully.
"Initial contact through diplomatic channels, establishment of trade relationships, gradual cultural exchange leading to potential membership in the Confederation.
The process typically takes several decades to complete."
Sarah Murphy nodded as if this confirmed something she had suspected. "A very systematic approach. Very civilized."
"And what happens when you encounter species that aren't interested in joining your confederation?"
"We respect their sovereignty and maintain minimal contact," I said, though even as I spoke the words, I was beginning to see how naive they might sound to human ears.
"The galaxy is vast enough for all species to coexist peacefully."
The three humans exchanged glances that spoke of shared knowledge I wasn't privy to. Captain Rodriguez leaned forward slightly, her expression serious but not unkind.
"Ambassador, may I ask how much your government has told you about current galactic conditions? Specifically regarding the Void Reaper resurgence?"
My scales immediately shifted to alarmed colors at the mention of the ancient machines. The Void Reapers were nightmare creatures from the early days of galactic civilization, mechanical entities that consumed entire worlds for incomprehensible purposes. Most species considered them a historical threat, dealt with millennia ago by the combined efforts of multiple civilizations. We are aware that there have been some isolated incidents, I said slowly. But our intelligence suggests these are just scattered remnants of ancient technology, nothing organized enough to pose a systematic threat. Dr. Harrison, who had joined us for the meal, pulled out a data tablet and placed it on the table between us. The screen showed a galactic map with red markers scattered across multiple sectors. There were far more markers than I had expected, and they were moving in coordinated patterns that suggested organized intelligence rather than random mechanical behavior. I'm afraid your intelligence sources may be somewhat outdated, she said gently. These are confirmed Void Reaper sightings from the past 6 months. They're not scattered remnants. They're organized fleets, and they're systematically targeting species that match specific criteria. I studied the map with growing horror. The red markers formed a clear pattern, moving steadily through sectors containing species that the Confederation had classified as promising targets for membership. Peaceful, technologically advanced civilizations that had built stable societies based on cooperation and mutual benefit. What criteria? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would be deeply disturbing. They're targeting species that have achieved advanced technology without developing significant military capabilities, Captain Rodriguez explained. Civilizations that have focused on exploration, trade, and peaceful expansion rather than defense and warfare. The implication hit me like a physical blow. The Void Reapers weren't randomly attacking. They were systematically eliminating species that couldn't fight back effectively. Peaceful civilizations like my own were being harvested with the same mechanical efficiency that the Reapers had shown millennia ago. How do you know this? I managed to ask. Sarah Murphy activated another display on the tablet, showing detailed tactical analyses of Reaper attack patterns. The information was incredibly detailed, suggesting intelligence-gathering capabilities far beyond anything the Confederation possessed. Because we've been fighting them for the past 2 years, she said simply. 16 separate engagements, ranging from small scouting forces to full fleet actions. We've learned quite a bit about their operational patterns and strategic objectives. My mind reeled as I tried to process this information. The humans had been fighting the Void Reapers for 2 years without any other species even being aware of it. They had engaged in 16 separate battles against the most dangerous threat in galactic history and never once requested assistance or support from the Confederation. Why didn't you contact the galactic community for help? I asked, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. Dr. Patterson laughed bitterly. We tried that after the first encounter. We sent detailed reports to every major galactic government, including your Confederation. The universal response was that we must be mistaken, that the Void Reapers were a historical threat that had been eliminated long ago. When we insisted, we were politely ignored. So we stopped asking for help and started developing our own solutions, Captain Rodriguez added. Her tone carried no accusation, but the implications were damning. The galactic community had abandoned humanity to face the Reapers alone, and they had not only survived but apparently prospered. Your government classified our reports as probably fraudulent, Sarah Murphy said, consulting her tablet. The official response stated that a species as young as humanity couldn't possibly have encountered Void Reapers, much less survived such encounters. The casual way she delivered this information sent chills through my nervous system. The Confederation Council, in their infinite wisdom, had dismissed humanity's warnings about the greatest threat to galactic civilization because humans were too young and inexperienced to be taken seriously. What have you learned about them? I asked, dreading the answer but needing to know. Dr. Harrison activated a new series of displays showing detailed technical analyses of Void Reaper technology and tactics. The information was staggering in its depth and precision. The humans hadn't just fought the Reapers. They had studied them, analyzed them, reverse-engineered their technology and developed countermeasures. They're not actually ancient machines, she began, her scientific enthusiasm evident despite the grim subject matter.
There's something much worse.
The Void Reapers are a form of artificial life that converts matter and energy from conquered civilizations into more copies of themselves.
They don't just destroy species.
They assimilate their knowledge, their technology, their biological and cultural adaptations.
She pulled up holographic models showing the internal structure of Reaper machines.
The complexity was beyond anything I had ever seen, with systems that seemed to blend organic and mechanical components in impossible ways. Each Reaper unit contains the accumulated knowledge and capabilities of every species they've ever consumed, Dr. Harrison continued.
They're not just weapons.
They're libraries of galactic civilization, turned into instruments of total destruction.
That's why they're targeting peaceful species first, Captain Rodriguez explained.
They're harvesting the accumulated knowledge and technology of the most advanced civilizations while eliminating potential threats to their expansion. By the time they're finished with the easy targets, they'll have assimilated enough capabilities to challenge even the most militarily advanced species.
The strategic implications were terrifying. The Void Reapers weren't just attacking random targets.
They were executing a systematic plan to consume galactic civilization one species at a time, growing stronger with each conquest until nothing could stop them.
How have you been able to fight them?
I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The three humans exchanged another of those significant glances before Captain Rodriguez answered.
We've been very creative in our approach to the problem.
Sarah Murphy activated a new display showing human fleet compositions and tactical innovations. What I saw challenged everything I thought I understood about space warfare. Instead of building larger ships with more powerful weapons, humans had developed swarm tactics using smaller, faster vessels that could coordinate with impossible precision. Traditional military doctrine focuses on achieving technological superiority through larger, more powerful individual units, she explained.
We took the opposite approach.
Instead of building ships that could outfight Reapers individually, we built fleets that could outthink them collectively.
The tactical displays showed human forces engaging Reaper fleets using strategies that seemed to defy all conventional military wisdom.
Small human ships would sacrifice themselves to create tactical opportunities for others, while entire squadrons would coordinate their movements to create complex patterns that confused Reaper targeting systems.
We also learned to use their own adaptability against them, Dr. Patterson added. Reapers are designed to analyze and counter enemy capabilities. So we started using tactics that were deliberately suboptimal, weapons that were intentionally flawed, strategies that made no logical sense.
You confused them into making mistakes, I said, beginning to understand the horrifying brilliance of the human approach.
Exactly, Captain Rodriguez confirmed.
We turned warfare into a form of performance art, where the goal wasn't to win battles but to teach the enemy to expect things that weren't actually happening.
By the time they figured out what we were really doing, we were already doing something completely different.
Dr. Harrison pulled up recordings of actual combat engagements, and I watched human pilots performing maneuvers that should have been impossible. They flew their ships like extensions of their own bodies, reacting to threats with speed and precision that bordered on precognitive. What was more disturbing was the way they worked together, thousands of individual minds functioning as a single tactical intelligence.
How do you coordinate such complex operations?
I asked, fascinated despite my growing fear.
Practice, Sarah Murphy said with that same unsettling smile. Humans are very good at learning from experience. We've had a lot of experience.
As the evening continued, the humans shared more details about their war against the Void Reapers.
Each revelation was more disturbing than the last.
They had developed weapons that could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics in localized areas. They had created artificial intelligences specifically designed to be insane in ways that would confuse enemy computer systems. They had even learned to weaponize human psychology itself, broadcasting thoughts and emotions that could drive Reaper machines into recursive logical loops. The thing about Reapers, Dr. Patterson explained as he finished his meal, is that they're perfect engines of destruction designed by an intelligence that thought it understood all possible forms of life in the galaxy.
But they never encountered humans before. What makes humans so different?
I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer would haunt my dreams for years to come. Captain Rodriguez stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars with an expression that spoke of experiences beyond my comprehension. Other species adapt to their environment. Humans adapt their environment to themselves. Other species develop technologies to solve problems. Humans develop problems to make their technologies more interesting. She turned back to face me, and, for a moment, I saw something in her eyes that made my scales shift to colors of pure terror. It wasn't madness exactly, but it was something beyond normal rational thought. It was the look of a predator that had spent years hunting prey that was stronger, faster, and more intelligent than itself, and had not only survived but learned to enjoy the challenge. The Void Reapers are designed to consume civilizations that make sense, she continued. They expect rational behavior, logical tactics, predictable responses to threats. What they got instead was a species that treats impossible odds as a starting point for creativity. I sat in silence for several minutes, processing everything I had learned. The humans weren't just another species seeking their place in galactic civilization. They were something unprecedented, something that had emerged from conditions so hostile that they had evolved beyond the normal parameters of sentient life. Ambassador, Sarah Murphy said gently, we're sharing this information with you because we believe your species deserves to know what's really happening in the galaxy. The Confederation's peaceful approach to expansion has made you a priority target for the Reapers. Without significant changes to your defensive capabilities, your people won't survive the next wave of attacks. The offer of help was implicit in her words, but so was the price. Accepting human assistance would mean acknowledging that our entire civilization was built on assumptions that were no longer valid. It would mean learning from a species that had embraced violence and chaos as tools of survival. As I looked at the three humans sitting across from me, I finally understood why my instincts had been screaming warnings since the moment I stepped aboard their ship. They weren't just dangerous because they possessed advanced weapons or superior tactics. They were dangerous because they represented an entirely different approach to existence itself. They had looked at a universe that was vast, hostile, and indifferent to suffering, and, instead of seeking shelter from its cruelties, they had learned to dance with them. For the first time in my life, I truly understood what it meant to be afraid.